Hi, Whitney.
Welcome to the podcast where we acknowledge that the ways we are working really aren't working anymore.
We invite you into conversations with thought leaders, coaches, and industry experts to explore strategies for living with more ease and less grind, more flow and less fight. Welcome to Untrained.
Good morning, Iris.
Hi, Whitney. We have a fun guest today.
Fun. We're going to talk about perfection and vulnerability and authenticity and hand out lots of permission slips. I think it's going to be fun.
I'm going to need every single one of those permission slips. Because when you say perfectionism, I'm like, yes, check. Vulnerability, no check. So I need this conversation with Julia West, Dr. Julia West. Hi, good morning.
Good morning. So happy to be here with you both.
Well, I'll just do a little spiel. I have the spiel of who you are, and I'm going to read it off, and then we'll just kick off from there. So, Dr. Julia West is a clinical psychologist, executive coach, and the director of science and content at Limitless Minds. If you haven't checked out Limitless Minds, it's unbelievable. It's an amazing company. Huge plug. With over a decade in clinical and health psychology, she's honed expertise in mental performance, resilience, and holistic well-being. She's adept in behaviors, sleep medicine, cognitive therapies, and disordered eating treatments. And I've known you through Limitless Minds when I was working there, and it was such a treat to be able to work with you. And today we're going to talk about a topic that is pretty personal to you.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think I always end up going the personal route because those are the things I can talk about with the most passion and the most experience behind it. So this topic is right up my alley.
And the irony is, too, that when we were talking about guests, it's like Julia knows the science. She's got the science. And I love when science meets personal because it's a robust conversation.
Well, I'm pretty sure that's how I live my life. I try to make science as relatable and fun and normal every day as it can be, because that was the way I always explained it to myself going through the years of school and the research. So I love it. I love when that happens. This is the best kind of conversation to make it real.
So what we're going to untrain at the top of the hour, and the idea that we need to be perfect to be effective. The idea that there is the mindset that there's no room for vulnerability in leadership, in building trust, in strong performances, in our best performances. So those are the topics that we are wanting to dismantle a little bit and then retrain.
Yeah.
Take it away. Where do you want to start? We just lined you up.
Well, I feel like, for me, the topic of perfectionism and vulnerability is always going to go hand in hand. And I think because I've had more experience than most with perfectionism. So as a psychologist, I treat a lot of folks that have clinical level of perfectionism tendencies, that result in certain kinds of disorders. And personally, I've not only experienced that, but I think I shared with you both, for most of my life, I tried with all of my might to be absolutely perfect. I was this little anxious kid that, my biggest fear was not being perfect and having people know that and then be disappointed in me. The life has a way of humbling you and sort of bringing you right to the brink of the things that you fear most, if you let it. And so those fears were very much realized for me, kind of going into, my teenage years and realizing that I had a lot of problems that made me really not perfect. And that led me to thinking, man, not only have I disappointed everybody, but I really have nothing to offer because I'm decidedly unperfect. And so I spent and have spent and am spending my adult life now. I'd love to say young adult life, but I think I'm past that. really proving myself wrong and recognizing that, hey, it's actually because I am not perfect and realized it and realized how to be able to show up for other people and provide value and help to their lives that makes me special. So in my imperfection, I kind of found my purpose.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. And one of the things we talked about when we had our pre-show conversation is that like our brain is hell-bent on being perfect and showing up perfect, whatever that means for each of us, which is different for each of us, which is different for each of the people out there listening, which is interesting, right? Duly noted. That sometimes our brains are committed, but our body's like, yeah, no. No, I'm not going to cooperate with that. Like, I'm going off this way, and I'm going to really mess with your perfectionism.
Yeah. What's funny, like our brains are wired to do that. So, I mean, I always sort of go back to, thinking about like, the three of us are here because we are the descendants of ancestors that had certain habits and behaviors and whose genes mutated in a certain way that it resulted in them surviving long enough to pass their DNA down.
And so, privileges.
And privileges. Right. So, we are here because our ancestors valued community and safety. And so our brains we have this evolutionary time lag in our brains where we're still functioning in a way that would have really behooved us really long ago in the past, but doesn't necessarily serve us now. I think of that as the scientific way of explaining that phrase we hear a lot in the performance space of what got you here won't get you there, right? So, in our evolutionary past, making a mistake that cost you a lot socially was actually really dangerous because it could get you ostracized from the group that provided and afforded you protection. And so there's a good reason why, right? Like we don't like the feeling of putting ourselves out there, right? Except that, how many times today are we really risking absolute, being totally ostracized out by ourselves, no, community help or support? It may often feel like that, like, hey, if I do this thing, if I put myself out there, if I'm brave and I don't know how it's going to work out, what are the consequences, right? And sometimes our brains inflate those and it feels a lot more dangerous than it really is. And so that's where I really think, being afraid of making a mistake, being afraid of not being perfect really connects with this idea of vulnerability, at least the way that I think about it.
Was there a point where you felt like we can go a really long time with being perfectionists, right? Because it's actually very externally validated.
Yes.
Yeah, doing the work, doing A++ work, right? Getting to the best colleges. So I do think that we do talk about adaptive and maladaptive practices of perfectionism, but I want to hear your story of when did you feel like you hit a point where what you did before wasn't going to work anymore and this really has to change?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I've hit that point multiple times. I think professionally, there have been times where, like, as a psychologist, I've had to acknowledge that my own inner struggles have to take up more space in my professional life than I'd like to give them. And how this kind of comes up sometimes is, when I was 27 years old, I was diagnosed with cancer. And that was a big deal in and of itself for lots of reasons, not the least of which was I was in the middle of specializing in residency and fellowship in psychosocial oncology, which is the psychologist on the cancer floor in the infusion clinics that's helping the patient and the families adjust to these big diagnoses. So I literally got off of a day on that rotation, got back to the bullpen, as we used to call it on residency, which was this like dank little office with this horrible gray carpet that now is seared in my memory forever because that was where I got the phone call about my test results. And it's weird. Like, you ever have those moments in life where everything just stops and you hear the adults from Charlie Brown, like, wah, 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 wah. Like, that's sort of how everything happened for me when I got this news. And I don't remember a ton from the rest of that day, but I knew that 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the office of one of these psychosocial oncologists that I hadn't trained with yet as a patient, right? Like, hey, I'm losing it. I don't know how to deal with this. Wow, I'm experiencing this really differently than I did 2 weeks ago, sitting on the other side of this sofa. So it was at that point where I was like, okay, what do I do? Can I do this? Can I do this work anymore? Can I help these people? Because they see me in the clinic, they see me in the office, they see me looking relatively put together. They don't see me having panic attacks at home at night. They don't see me sobbing, crying on my husband's shoulder. Like, is this it? Do I ever get to have kids? Am I going to be alive next year? Right? They don't see, the prescriptions of, benzodiazepines that don't work because my anxiety is literally that high. Wow. And so it was at that point where I was really like, I don't think I can I do this? Like, do I have anything of value to offer? And, that's that first point where I realized, okay, like I'm going to need to acknowledge that I'm a whole person and not just this like one-dimensional person, that in order to figure out if I even can move forward. And so what that meant, Iris, at that time in my life is that I got a heck of a lot of therapy. And I had to really check my attitude, because some therapists, I'm sure you guys as coaches are not like this. I will throw myself under the bus. I could be doing the best evidence-based therapy with a patient, and if a person in my life dared to recommend that I do that thing, I'd be like, that's not going to work for me. And I know I've read the research that it should, or that it will, or that if I'm in that 80%, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm not doing it. Or like, I understand it too well. It's not going to work. So I had to really check my attitude at the door and be like, hey, am I willing to really do what I watch my brave patients do every day? Yeah. And during that period of time, I had to do something I had never done before, which was put some professional goals on hold. And that was really scary for me, because up until that point, I was the youngest person in my graduate school. So I took 1 year off between college and graduate in a PhD program. That is pretty rare. Like, usually people do more years. Maybe they get a master's in between. They're going and working at a lab. They're working in industry. I didn't. I was pretty lockstep, because like that was what I interpreted at the time as the perfect way, or the best way to go. We're like, oh, I'll get started faster. I'll have a leg up. Really, it just meant I had less life experience to deal with all these things. So I had to kind of learn on the fly. So while I was getting all of that therapy myself and working on that, I had to not see patients with those problems. And that was hard for me at the time, because I thought I was failing by doing that. But I realize now I needed to take a step back in order to take a leap forward in my work.
What did you learn from that, right? Because we see a lot of leaders and people who hit that mark, right? Of like, I can't be doing it like I've been doing it. I'm burned out. I can't do it this way. And if I let go, I'm going to be failing. So it's coaching them through that process. Yeah. However, we often see, the punchline to that is when they do, quote unquote, take a step back, which I don't actually think it is, they begin to get the things that they actually need and want. Right. So we work so hard to get the things that we need and want. What's that song? You can get what you need.
The Rolling Stones.
Can't always get what you want. But you get what you need.
Sometimes just might find you get what you need.
Right, but that's it. Is like, I want people to see me as this capable person. But it's interesting is in that moment of showing vulnerability and stepping back, you're actually showing how strong you are to others and to yourself. So I'd love to hear from you, Whitney. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to kind of pinpoint, what did you actually learn about yourself in that process? What did you actually learn? What did you discover? Not just what you felt like you lost, but what did you gain?
Yeah. That's a great point, or a great question. I wish I had a really enviable story, but here's the truth. And sometimes, by the way, I think that's what I mean by vulnerability. Being honest when it benefits people, even if you feel uncomfortable doing it. So I'm going to do that.
Say that again. I love that.
Yeah. One way I think about vulnerability is being honest when doing so would benefit other people and yourself, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable to be honest. So my honest truth is that I never would have done it if I didn't have to. I didn't really have a choice. I was really quite broken when I got that diagnosis. Like, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating. I'd love to say that I went on a meditative walk and I wrote in my journal and I talked to my, coach, and I made this made this decision intentionally to step back. Nope. I made it because I literally couldn't function. And so what I had to do is I had to dig myself out of a shame hole before I could figure out what was I gaining, right? And so one of the things I learned from that was two things, actually. The first is, hey, don't wait until you don't have another choice to take care of yourself and think about what it is that you want. It sounds pretty basic, but I had to learn that one the hard way. And the second thing, and this might make me cry because it's still so deeply important and impactful to me. I learned how wonderful other people actually are. So I had a great psychosocial oncologist at the time who told me in the days before, I could get an AI helper to write a difficult letter. She helped me write a letter to my patients at the time, being honest with them about why I needed to step back. She said, listen, you can slink away and you can do this privately. Or you could show solidarity for the people that are coming to you for this problem and walk away with your head held high. You choose, right? Which this was hard. She was tough. She knew what I needed at the time. And so I did the second one. And the amount of strength I was able to draw from a community of people that I thought I could only give value to, but couldn't get value back from, was absolutely life-changing. And it completely changed the way, whether I'm working with a patient or a client about cancer or about anything else, it completely changed the way I thought about the work that I do. And now I look for the value that each individual person that I'm showing up for brings to my life, because it's always there. And if I don't see it, that's my fault. So yeah, I mean, I'm never one of those people that will ever say, I'm so grateful for cancer. I don't believe that at all. I'm not happy that it happened, but I'm proud of myself for what I made out of it.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
It's intense, and I'm really grateful that you have. And I have one set of questions and then building into something else. When you talked about that first sort of vulnerability, I would free fall, you also talked about it feeling like a failure. And then you said I had to dig out of the shame. So let's talk a little bit about the way many people have been trained to feel like vulnerability is a failure. And if I just take a moment, in the sports world, right, there is some failure in vulnerability, right? Like, you do have to be a strong teammate. You do have to show up your best. You do have to show up. Like, there's all these ways that you kind of are failing the team. if you're step back for your own vulnerability, right? There's a lot of training there, and I think in the corporate world. So could you speak to how you worked with yourself and how you work with your clients who are trying to untrain from perfection and stop coupling vulnerability and failure?
If you're going to be in a relationship with somebody over the long haul, whether that's with like, a relationship with a team, like a corporate team that you're on, a sports team, in your personal life, or with yourself, which is the longest term relationship that any of us are in, you need to be able to acknowledge that you are not going to be static, and your team or your group isn't going to be either. And so if you are only okay when things are going a certain way, or you only know how to relate to yourself or to other people when things are going the way that you want them to go, you're in trouble. And so that was a lesson I learned here. It was that I was like, okay, when I'm digging myself out of this, I'm trying to figure out, listen, there are going to be other times in my life where I have to dig myself out. Can I use this as a practice for how to love myself through that and get through that in a way that doesn't turn me into somebody I don't want to be? So that the next time something like this happens, because there's going to be a next time, even if it looks different, I'm operating now with some experience. So that's one of the things. I'm a forward looker a little bit. So I was trying to think like, what if I live through this, if I get through this, like what can I take from it? And that was really helpful to me in the moment, because Whitney, I know you do a lot of body image work with clients. Eating disorders is one of my clinical specialties. And I always tell folks this, is that like, if you're only okay with your body when it looks a certain way, you're not actually okay with your body, because your body's going to change over the course of a lifetime. Maybe you get sick, maybe you have a child, right? Like most of my clients are women, maybe you, whatever, right? Like just go through, the wear and perimenopause, menopause, doesn't matter. Like
maybe you live on a planet with gravity.
I was just going to say, gravity comes for us all in the end. And so like, if you are only okay with like being in this narrow parameter of what it means to be perfect or to be lovable, you're not really okay. You're at risk of being 1 pound, 1 centimeter, 1 job away from feeling worthless. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I used kind of like my desire to experience things and grow from them to dig myself out of this. And I can confirm that I have had shame moments since. Surprise. And that, it's never easy, but it's gotten easier with time. And I think that the work I put in up at that point really helped.
You have what Brene Brown calls vulnerability hangovers still?
Yes, I do sometimes.
I do too.
I think, but then the other thing I wanted to touch on was like, you had said, we're trained to think of it as weakness. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times that also, one of the things I know I've had to learn about vulnerability is that vulnerability without boundaries is not actual vulnerability.
Or useful to the other person.
Correct. It's something else, right? So there are definitely times when, as a practitioner or as a mother or as a friend, I might not share something because doing so would violate like an emotional boundary for myself or the relationship with the other person. And in that moment, that's not me not being vulnerable. That's me having good boundaries. So I like to just put that little cap on it, because when I'm doing this work sometimes with clients, they'll be like, wait a minute, like, what if I don't have the kind of trusting relationship with somebody to share something? Am I supposed to do that anyway, just to be able to be vulnerable? And I was like, no, that's not what we mean at all. It's more about, if you tell yourself you have to go through all these things alone, and to show any vulnerability means you're weak, you're missing out on a huge part of the human experience that can change your relationships and your community.
I think what I'd like to do too is there's this untraining piece that you're talking about of untraining that vulnerability means that you're just going to word vomit all of the stuff that you feel, right? So like, here are all my feelings and it's here for you. And you deal with it, right? Like that's not what we're saying, but I'd love for us to kind of talk about when someone is a leader and they're like, I want to be vulnerable with my team. I want to try it because I think it will build trust. It will help us gain as a team to do that. How can I do that? So I'd love some thought from the both of you too of how can one be vulnerable? What are those boundaries? What should I think about when I'm trying to do that with a team?
I think owning your mistakes and apologizing with a period, right? Not I'm sorry, but the fake apology. I'm sorry, period. And then sharing your growth areas. 2 huge ways that a leader can be vulnerable in a really helpful way to their team that doesn't involve any personal disclosure at all. And obviously, I'm not against personal disclosure, but I think that people think to be vulnerable, they have to overshare or they have to be willing to talk about their personal life. And you're not always in relationships, whether it's with colleagues or friends or otherwise, where you feel the degree of trust or it would be helpful to share that. And so can I not be vulnerable then? And the answer is, of course you can. There are other ways to do this.
In option A, my father was really critical of me, so it makes it difficult for me to make decisions, and I'm not sure which way we should go as a team. That's not what we're talking about. It could be, given market conditions that have changed really quickly, I'm not entirely sure where we should go next, but based on these factors, this is how I've decided we should proceed, right? One is personal disclosure, one is vulnerability without any personal, and then not that they are linked, but
you're totally right. Or even a leader saying, hey, I could be wrong.
Right. I mean, I think that's always tricky, right? Like who we have to decide like who our team needs us to be, right? Sometimes they need us to know. And sometimes they need us not to know. It goes back to that, like what's kind.
It's exactly right. Like there are these decisions, right? When you're a leader, like hey, you decide on your own, or the leader's like, hey, we'll discuss, and the leader will decide. The leader decides on their own, or hey, we'll discuss and we'll decide together, right? So there was like that kind of a quadrant. So it's definitely a dance and a nuance, but I think a leader who feels like they always have to show up, absolutely knowing the answer, being 100% certain, is probably also a leader that's going to walk into a team meeting, ask for feedback, and get nothing.
I do also want to make the point, and you had said this here too, so I want to bring it up. I think what I've done in my life, because I do need to be able to, I have lots and lots and lots of feelings, and I am very good at bottling up those feelings to get performance things done, to coach people. But then I have people like Whitney where I can call her and be like, this
Whitney
is how I really feel. So I think it's really important that the journey is not just by yourself, that, if you do need places to process, find those places to process and find the ways that you process, because it's not so that you can show up and pick and choose what it is that you, not pick and choose, but to be honest with people, you still need to work out some of those feelings. So I want to be clear that this work isn't done alone, and that you have people in your lives that you can process with.
There are very few moments or stretches of time in my adult life that I haven't had a therapist or a couple. I should say no. I never had 2 therapists at the same time. That's splitting. You would have like a therapist and a coach. I couldn't agree more. I mean, like, I think that, and there comes the vulnerability, because I had a lot of my own stuff to get over, going to people for help about things that I thought I shouldn't need help for because of what I do for my job, right? Until I realized that people whose work is very much emotionally laborious, and that includes like coaches, therapists, lots of folks, managers, oftentimes like leaders, right? If you have a job that requires you to put out emotional labor, you need something filling up your cup, and other people in your life that you trust, that you can turn to, that you could let your hair down with. You could be like, wow, I'm losing it. Let me tell you all the ways, right? Like, that's not a nice to have. That is an absolute must have for you to not just show up, like you said, Iris, like for your clients, but this is also your life, right? Like, it's not like the entire meaning of your existence happens in those interactions with your clients. Like, you're also allowed to want it for you, for enjoyment, for fulfillment, so that you could wake up every day and feel a sense of peace and happiness. Like, that's, I don't show up for people in my life because I feel like that's the only meaning my life has. I do it because I love it and it's important to me. But I also love the moments that I'm not doing it. And I think that vulnerability and acknowledging that allows you to lean more into those areas of your life where you need other people, where you need to take care of yourself. And it helps you show up better, even when we are talking about performance.
So I love that as sort of helping us land this plane.
Yeah.
That our ability to be more vulnerable, to step away from perfection, gives us a better life, gives us a more robust life, gives us a more satisfying life.
Yeah. I think that it's, I always think this, right? Like, if maybe I could have been perfect, but I don't think I would have been as happy. I think at the end of the day, it's taken me years to get to the point where I'm like, if I had to choose, and I do want to be clear, you do have to choose. You don't get both. I pick happy. And I think that, most of the people I work with, once they've done their own work, they pick that too.
Yeah. Safety. I think it's safety versus happy. And sometimes we're so wired for safety, we don't even really know what happy fully feels like.
Yeah. And that's why this work, I think, is so important. No matter what your role is, no matter where you are in your life, if you feel like you can't be your true self, or take a risk, or feel uncomfortable, whether it's about your emotions or just admitting that you're a human person and that you're not this like one-dimensional bot, right? If you feel any of those things, it's a sign that you probably do need to work on your willingness or your ability to be vulnerable. And at least I think if my experience is any help, I'm really glad that I did it. I really can't imagine how I would have gotten through even just the things that have happened to me so far in my life without having that. So it's worth it.
Well, I think that we've hit this topic. It's amazing. I want to keep working on my own vulnerability, because sometimes I can get trapped in work mode and not think about that. Okay, Whitney, at the end of every episode, what do we say?
Keep on training.
Keep on training. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe, YouTube, and everywhere you get podcasts. Thanks for listening to Untrained.